Hello and welcome to today's session of Kong Plugins 101. Plugins are your way of applying governance, of applying the rules of engagement for each of your API call. So now on the left hand side, as you see, we have the API requests that are coming in from the consumers and the response which is being sent out by your HTTPBin service, SFTC service, and so on. And in the middle sits the Kong API gateway, wherein you can apply all of these rules in the form of authentication, authorization, who is allowed to make the calls, how many calls, throttling, rate limiting, and so on and so forth, and have also some advanced rules around security and governance being applied as functionalities through Kong plugins. So essentially, Kong plugins are this long list of features, or if you may will, functionalities that you may apply around your API calls. This is our one-stop shop for all of the plugins that we develop, we maintain, and we support, and also the third-party plugins that have been developed in order to support those basic functionalities. You can go ahead and filter them based on your requirement and see what applies in your case and what would be required for your API calls. We also have the possibility to develop custom plugins for those advanced requirements or maybe certain customized functionalities that you want to apply for your API requests, for which we have the plugin development kit. Now let us go ahead and see Kong Konnect in action, where we are able to define our services like the HTTPBin service. So if I go ahead and click on the gateway services that I'm supporting through my Kong Konnect gateway, is this long list of various services, of which HTTPBin is one of those services. The idea here is that for this HTTPBin service, when I have an external consumer who is calling into this service, I want to make sure that only 5 calls are allowed every minute for this particular service on a route that I have defined. So for this particular service, we have gone ahead and created a route which is called the demo plugin. And essentially, when I call this particular endpoint /app/v1 plugins through my Kong proxy, because now HTTPBin service sits behind my Kong proxy, I am allowed to route the call to the HTTPBin. So let's go ahead and see that in action. One time, I'm calling my Kong proxy, the local host, with the app_v1 plugin endpoint, and I'm going to get the response back from the HTTPBin service. So it's being routed through my gateway. And at this point, I am going to go ahead and apply a plugin on this particular route. So I have this route which is called demo plugins, and I already have a plugin which is set up as the rate limiting advanced plugin, but it is disabled at this point. How we go and add plugins is that we have the button essentially to add a new plugin, which when I click, I am then presented with this long list of different plugins that I am able to configure on this particular route. So going back to what I have already said, which is my rate limiting advanced plugin, where I say that only 5 calls should be allowed for every consumer who is going through this route within a minute's time frame, which could be a sliding window in this case. I go ahead and enable this plugin, and now each time I call the endpoint through the proxy, we will check through a counter how many calls have been made and make sure after the 5th call, the 6th call has been denied. So let's go ahead and check that out. And to mention that we now have the header being set with the rate limit being set on this header as well. So we see the counter going down, and after the 5th call, the 6th call is essentially not routed through, because that's what we have set as the rule on this particular route. And when we go ahead and see the analytics, we are also presented with the analytics on the same when the calls were essentially blocked after there were too many requests being made. So this is how we very simply apply plugins on different routes. And one idea, which is also a basic prioritization rule, is that we can apply plugins at different granularity levels. We can have a globally scoped plugin. For example, a logging plugin. We have plugins which allow you to log every API, every request that is being made, and we could go ahead and have these logs being collected at a global level, and for that it makes sense to apply this plugin globally. So when we go ahead and set, we have the possibility to set this plugin at a global level. But we could also have plugins scoped to certain services or even to certain routes, for which we could have different levels of granularity, as I mentioned, and at the level of the route or at the level of the consumer even, which is the most granular setup. So with the example of rate limiting plugin, if we were to have a global rate limit, for example, of 4 calls per minute, but we set at the route level 5 calls per minute, we were allowed to make then only 5 calls to that particular route, and that's the more granular setup, and hence it takes precedence over the global setup. And that's the idea of having our plugins here. So to sum it all up, every functionality that you may want to apply as a part of the rule of engagement or the rule itself to govern an API call, you apply that via this basic functionality that we provide as plugins in Kong. Thank you so much for tuning in, and see you for the next session, where we go ahead and deep dive into security plugins and specifically on the OIDC plugin.